You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
You know, of course, the terms left and right didn't always exist. It really comes out of the French Revolution and that 1789, when the revolution first happens and the National Assembly takes control. So it starts with the Estates General, and it starts with the various chambers, the one for the clergy, the one for the peasants, more or less, or it's really the middle class, and the one for the aristocracy. So the three Estates Generals form, and then the one that's for the middle class group, the commoners, they decide, these two other groups, you actually have no authority. The king summoned you, but the only real authority for the people of France is the body that represents the people of France. So we're just going to form this French National Assembly. That's what starts everything, and 2-3 years later, you're going to start get guillotining, and the king will fall as well.
Now's the time to save on new carpet at the Home Depot. Receive 10% off your total carpet project and 12 months special financing. Plus, we'll measure your space for free. Choose from a variety of stylish, on-trend options fit for everyday life. With LifeProof with pet-proof technology, Home Decorators Collection, and Traffic Master carpets. Save 10% and get 12 months special financing now at the Home Depot. Offer valid April 16th through May 3rd, 2026. Exclusions apply. For licenses, see homedepot.com/license numbers.
There are over 1,000 people, okay? And what's starting to happen is you have those who are revolutionaries and those who support the monarchy. And the ones supporting the monarchies quickly say, we're tired of being over there with the revolutionaries because they keep shouting at the speaker. They keep shouting to be heard at the president of the assembly, keep shouting at him. They're interrupting, they're noisy, and, you know, just physically, do you want to be next to a person shouting? They're not shouting your cause, they're shouting something you're against. Who wants to be there? So they gradually, as one Baron de Gaulleville describes, those who were loyal to the king were on the right side, and then the others stayed on the left. And in the middle were people who didn't want to be associated with either group but could be persuaded by either. And at first it's monarchy versus revolution. But then when everyone's a revolutionary and monarchy is thrown out, and those who supported the monarchy are hunted down, in some cases killed, now everybody's a revolutionary, but the same dynamic keeps on. And the term keeps up, so when Thomas Jefferson's writing to Lafayette, he uses this term, left and right. He uses the French word for left and right, but he talks about, aristocrats and democrats, the left and the right. He also uses the term serviles and liberals. See, so if you want some more flavor, we could adopt those terms in our politics, like people who are servile to the establishment, right? And liberals who believe more in individual freedom, whatever the ideology behind that freedom. Babette writes me in regards to our Q&A episode about Lincoln and Cooper Union, but also the comment about the David Sirota interview. Thank you for highlighting David Sirota's work. He has been at the forefront of analyzing the populist movement, highlighting the need to steer it away from authoritarianism. In his 2008 book, The Uprising, Sirota has continued his independent journalism career and is the creator of a valuable news site called The Lever, which aggressively reports on corruption. So perhaps relegating him just to the left fails to appreciate the fundamental morality of his journalistic position. And yes, so thanks, Babette. And I agree with that. I felt during the interview, and he was kind to come on the show. He's a big name, and it's great to be recognized that someone would want to come on. It's normally just me talking, right? That's why we made it clear for him to give several examples of things he didn't like from Democratic presidents that had used executive power in a way that he critiqued. However, what'll happen is when I'm answering a question, like right now I'm answering your question, it frames the discussion, right? So if I'm just talking generally about a topic, I might go in 27 directions about a general topic like student loans, or corruption generally in politics or freedom of speech. But if I'm answering a question, it's going to be more narrow. So the question that had been asked is, why didn't he give an example of, more what he was looking for from a Democratic president? And then the person had listed things done by what I would describe as kind of your mainstream Democratic presidents. But I was pointing out that this is a figure on the left, right? So we might expect him to not be happy with those executive moves and to want other ones. That's really what I meant. It's interesting. You get into that left and right. They are such incomplete words. But what else do you use? Liberal and conservative, too, can be such incomplete thoughts. And people are really more complex than that. Like, you put that on a different index. One index we've used in the past is maybe somebody is left or right, liberal, conservative on political issues, but are they pro-establishment or anti-establishment? Not a person that people think as that complex, but if you analyze Ronald Reagan's presidency, you're going to find, as I talk about, that he had some of these very, what we would call right-wing advisors, say Bill Clark, just trying to stop him from making certain statements, or having a meeting even with the Soviet ambassador in Washington a mile away to even talk. So Reagan used a lot of what would be considered right-wing talking points as a candidate, delighting some of these conservatives. As a president, particularly term 2, does start to annoy some of them. Now, there's not a lot of place to go. It's kind of like today with Trump. It's hard to be more MAGA than Trump, right? It's similar then. But on certain issues, you take, for instance, the missile treaty with the Soviet Union, right? As the elections come out of 1988, you have people like big conservative backers that are not with Reagan on that. We should not be signing this treaty. Of Dan Quayle voting against it, he gets the VP nomination. Okay, that's one of the reasons. It was to appease that side of Republican politics. So the funny thing was that the whole time Reagan is president, only those closest, like people like Mike Deaver, knew this guy in his rhetoric is very harsh. In his mind, many of those people were looking at him like he could very well be at a no nukes rally. He wants to really do something about it. And all they could do is to try best to manage him and treat it like it's just a fluke thing and we're going to get past it. And then when the opportunity came, you saw what happened. So where does that fit in ideology, right? He also embraced a tax bill that was very democratic in nature, something that more progressive type of tax reform, and defended it to the hilt. So, where do you put people in politics like that? Now, nobody in that French assembly knew that people are going to start referring in politics to anything based on where they happen to be sitting. This all comes later. In that body, you had the different groups, and you had what you would call the Mountain, the Jacobins, and they were usually sat in seats up high. That's why they got to be known as the Mountain. And the Girondins, who really are still revolutionaries and still, for European opinion, considered pretty radical people. Like, for instance, like the Austrians didn't really want to deal with them because even though the Girondins are saying, hey, these Jacobins want to behead us, you're still revolutionaries. And many Girondins still contributed to the killing of the king or voted for the king to be killed, etc. Then you have the Plain that's in the middle. And those are kind of the three groups that we look at in the French Revolution. And if it's, if you're staring at the map, the Girondins on the right, the Mountains on the left, the Plains in the middle. And it shows you how important The French Revolution used to be in political discussions, even in the United States. When I had, and I still highly recommend Will Clark's Gray History, the French Revolution. Check it out, that podcast, if you haven't. It's great. Now he's doing tours of France. When we had him on and we were talking, it's kind of a lost art of American political rhetoric. We don't hear references to the French Revolution anymore. But in Theodore Roosevelt's time, you certainly would. And I played the debate between Theodore Roosevelt and Taft, which was a debate about different figures. And they were just naming them as if all Americans listening to the phonograph and hearing their voices would understand who these, who these figures of French history were. But the French Revolution was so seated in American minds, in a lot of cases, as an example of what not to do and why we have an American example of liberty, but with enough guardrails. Very important, particularly like in that 19th century talk. So this is kind of where it starts coming out, the left and the right, because the French Revolution is so well studied, which it isn't as much anymore. So according to this article in the Journal of Social and Political Psychology, which is talking about the different inferences that come around left and right, at the point that the French Revolution nears an end, which we would call the Directory era, when the Directories formed after the fall of Robespierre, towards the end of the Terror in 1794, drastic measures were taken to prevent the formation of groups in the new parliament. In the new Council of 500, established in September 1795, so it's already smaller than the National Assembly, the delegates were given numbered seats, and every 3 months the seating arrangements were reshuffled by drawing lots. These measures were maintained during the Napoleonic period, and were indeed effective in preventing any ideological lots or geographically based groups from being formed. So for a period of 19 years, from 1795 to the fall of Bonaparte, the formation of ideologically motivated left and right-wing factions in the parliament were rendered impossible. The division into left and right was given free rein for 5 years at most, May 1789 to June 1794, and more than one of these years was in a reverse form. One might suppose that after this rather unruly and confused start, those 19 years would have been enough for the left-right polarization to be forgotten or abandoned. In 1814, Louis XVIII returned from England to take his place as a monarch. Yeah, so I don't know how much French history people are aware of. There's often a thought that you went right from the Revolution to Napoleon to democracy, and no, they reinstituted a king at a certain point there. A couple of them. The most prominent members of the new Chamber of Deputies and Chamber of Peers could count on the support of groups varying in size and composition. There were no organized parties, because their existence would have been at odds with the free exchange of ideas between the delegates. But certain customs did arise, such as the formation of groupings, with the conservatives to the right of the president and the liberals to the left. And so left-right polarization was reborn. And they remain with us today. Article is pretty interesting if you want to go a different direction and think about psychological consequences. We've left the standard way of thinking in science, which would seek to precisely define what belongs to left and to right far behind us. A physiochemical proposition that metals are heavier than nonmetals is simply disproved by the fact that aluminum is lighter than iodine. But someone who observes that the people living in a certain region favor the left hand cannot immediately conclude that the whole idea of the favored right hand can be thrown overboard. There may be special circumstances that explain this deviation. We've entered a world of constructed cultural experiences, which are influenced by continually changing context. Every adult knows that the right hand refers not just to a part of the body, but also metaphorically to a trusted companion, follower, or subjects. Right hand. Droit in French also refers to the law, as does in Dutch and German. Every language carries traditions and customs embedded within it, as sayings, idioms, and expressions. Really, by the 1830 or so, you have the terms first in France, then Europe, and eventually in America. Don't want to use all these labels, but what else do I do at a certain point, What else do I do? I'll give you a perfect example. Like a left-leaning congressperson or a left-leaning city council person can be a lot more liberal than a left-leaning mayor or a left-leaning president, because the president is in the position of still having to do executive authority. The mayor of a city still has a city to run. Running a city that it's easy for a legislator to just pass a law on. So, yeah, we should be, would love to find broader, more interesting terms for all of this stuff. But sometimes, as a quick reference, if I'm explaining, anyone who's explaining something to the story the person hasn't heard before, you start using labels. And then you explain the nuances later. We love nuance here. 20 years of nuance. On my YouTube video about 25th Amendment, Section 4 Explained, that's when we had Brian Colt. And another one I got commentary from Teshua on YouTube. But by the way, the YouTube's growing. We got like 1,100 people there. I mean, that's pretty good, Thanks. I didn't expect YouTube to be such a big channel because I don't generally do videos. I don't really plan to. Once in a while, I will pop a video on there, but rare. But it's great. Okay, so he says about the 25th Amendment. I find it so fascinating how a law can consist of fewer than 300 words and have such extensive implications that entire books can be written about it. Concerning Section 4, I think that it could become a very popular position to support the creation of a framework for a body that can substitute the cabinet in case of emergencies, like a body consisting of medical professionals. I'm not even going to touch on how they would be selected. Okay, so I just want to explain that there's a line in Section 4 that says, such other body as Congress may prescribe by law. And what that means is, generally it's going to be the cabinet plus the vice president who decides if the president has a capacity to continue under the 25th Amendment. But what the Congress can do by law, we'll get into what that means. But essentially it means Mike Johnson alone you can't just get a few congressmen say, hey, we're going to do this. No, by law, they have to pass a law. Can decide that instead of the cabinet, it could be the vice president and some other body. You still have the vice president's equation. 25th Amendment, the whole motor is the vice president. If you don't have the vice president, you don't have a 25th Amendment action. And that's why Hollywood writers seem to be so much, there seems to be so much more going on with Hollywood script writers than in actual events. But who knows? Especially because presidents pick VPs, all but do. Or at least they have to approve them. At least they have to approve them. So that's how party conventions work these days. The guy that wins the presidential nomination, right? Or the woman, got two examples now, picks. Sometimes it can be contentious, right? I think that Walsh and Harris, had that ever happened, would have got along. What about Shapiro and Harris if that had happened? I think we see in some of the gossipy talk, your political type stuff, that there probably would have been some tensions. Shapiro feeling, governor of Pennsylvania, might have wanted a larger role and things like that. And then you wonder about a 25th Amendment if that ever comes up. But anyway, nonetheless, you have to have the VP. That's the motor for the whole thing. Without it, there is no 25th action. What we're talking about here, Teshua, is that body that Congress could, by law, provide. So he says, I'm not even going to touch on how they would be selected. That could be used to make such a decision, but only when a medical argument for inability is made, or something similar for national security threats, foreign influence concerns, that consist of theoretically unbiased former directors of law enforcement and intelligence agencies appointed by former presidents that aren't eligible for re-election. I think frameworks like this carry the sentiment of the 25th and would be a good addition to existing checks and balances. Yeah. And a couple of notes about that. Congress can totally do that. Congress could put police officers on there. Congress could put FBI and CIA intelligence experts on there to say, does this president, we live in a globally interconnected world. We're going to have this president and future presidents who are going to have business interests. Who's going to determine that there's a problem here? So I totally agree with you that Congress could combine, could say have 3 intelligence directors, 3 senators from the same party as the president, 3 doctors, maybe different types. One might be a heart doctor. The other one may be neurology is probably going to be a key thing here. And make this determination. They have to do it by law. You could totally do it. Law is not that difficult, really, in the scheme of things. It's pass the House, pass the Senate, and the current president signs it. And while I don't think there's a chance, and that's going to happen right now, there could be a future president who envisions that this needs to be done, as Lyndon Johnson did when the 25th Amendment was passed during his watch. Now, I have to be clear there. When it passes, Lyndon Johnson doesn't have a say. Constitutional amendment goes, House and Senate approves it, but it's a joint decision of those bodies and goes right out to the states. And the Secretary of State collects it when it's done. There is no, and as you've seen recently with various things, 27th Amendment and the proposed ERA, it's the archivist that ends up taking it in, saying, okay, we've received the correct ratifications. So the president doesn't have anything to do with it, except that with the 25th, they were really looking to Lyndon Johnson as the successor to Kennedy, as the vice president that had experienced the murder of a president, to endorse this system, which he did. So it's very president-friendly. And I think they wanted it to be, they did not want the kind of hijinks that you see in TV shows. In case it's contested, this body, it would have to go through Congress anyway with higher requirements than impeachment and removal, so a political usage of such frameworks seems unlikely. Right. So, I don't think if you create this body of these people, that's a good point. Let's say the vice president is in the, is corrupt, and let's say that he has a lot to do with getting this body appointed through Congress, which with convincing the president these are all good, upstanding people. And then when they get there, those doctors, we find out, have political leanings to the vice president. The intelligence services guys want the vice president to put them back in their jobs. And the people from the same party, they're from the same party as the vice president. And they all conspire to get the president out. And the president's not really sick, not really unable, and you have a TV show, right? I mean, I'll never say never on anything these days. I'll never say I'll never say never there. But you're absolutely right that the shenanigans are stopped by 2/3. So it's 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate. Might as well just go get an impeachment. It's easier. So it's really designed for an emergency situation. It's designed to work quickly, too. It is. So that if there's a fast-acting thing like a stroke, it can really all be done pretty quickly, probably using there's some transmit is the word used, so it can be remote. Thanks, Tesha. And the other thing is 300 words. Well, that's the Constitution for you. I mean, a lot of these amendments are not that many words, and it's designed, constitutional law, to be sparse. It's something that's forgotten, I think, oft by our friends who are very adherent to a textual philosophy, that this is written short so that other law can fill in the details. The alternatives, if you have the EU Constitution, that is 10 times the words of the American Constitution. So we write things short. Even the future amendments, with some exceptions, are pretty concise.
Every week, we cover the week's tech news on This Week in Tech. Hi, this is Leo Laporte inviting you to join me and my panelists this week, Jason Heiner, Doc Rock, and Mike Elgin. Will talk about Anthropic's new AI. They say it's too dangerous to release. Sam Altman responds to the firebombing of his house, and Samsung jumps profits 8-fold thanks to AI. You'll find Twit at twit.tv or wherever you get your podcasts.